Welcome to another edition of Calgary in Depth. This time, I'm very happy to be talking to a good friend of mine, Joseph Garzon, and he doesn't actually currently live in Calgary. So usually we'll be talking to people who are here in Calgary, but he moved away a few years ago, and I thought it would be very interesting to talk to somebody who's been away for a few years, because I know for myself, I feel like I don't really have a good perspective on a place until I've had some distance from that place. So, Joe, thanks for being here. You're in Regina right now. I'm in Calgary. Remind me, how long ago you first came to Calgary?
Okay, so I first moved to Calgary in the fall of 2009 with my, ex-girlfriend at that time. We moved to central Calgary in the Bankview area. We got a place there, and I worked for a group benefits insurance company when I started there in 2009. Yeah.
You're born in Regina and grew up there, right?
Exactly. Actually, I was born in Toronto. My parents
Hmm.
immigrated from Colombia to Toronto, and my three siblings, we were all born in Toronto, and my dad was transferred to Regina in the early 80s.
When you first moved to Calgary, what did you know about Calgary? Had you visited a few times as a kid, or just growing up?
Actually, no, and to be honest, we didn't really travel too much. It wasn't sort of a luxury that we had growing up. So Regina, Saskatoon is pretty much my frame of reference as far as cities go. So when I
Yeah.
first saw Calgary, to me, it was like going to New York City in a lot of ways. Big buildings, downtown. It was amazing during that time. I was 19, 20
Okay.
at that time.
Okay.
So, I was graduated, and I was going on a road trip with a buddy of mine. He was going to school in Simon Fraser, but
Yep.
so helped them move, and it was kind of an exploration of sorts. And Calgary to me was like an eye opener. It's not just a big city, and where everybody drinks and all that, because you hear about the stampede. That's quite a big thing there.
Yeah.
And oil and gas. It was a very rich city as far as the infrastructure goes. To me, it was just clean, all these roadways, aggressive drivers merging, things like that was like really stood out to me.
Oh, is that right? Okay. And
Yeah.
so you ended up being in Calgary for how many years?
I moved in the fall of 2009, and I left in the fall of 2017. So almost exactly 8 years my soul was in Calgary.
Right, right. What were some of the initial activities you did when you were in Calgary? What first caught your attention besides what we've already talked about?
2009, really, what I did was, I would think more of the stereotypical tourist thing. We did a lot of like the popular sites and areas. I enjoyed Heritage Park, going to see the history. That to me was great, because in a certain small area, you get to kind of see the history and what sort of makes up what made Calgary so expand so fast, especially from the
Hmm.
70s to the 90s. Obviously, it was quite a huge boom at that time,
Yes.
and so it was more of exploring different areas, hiking different areas. Fish Creek Park, in there, just in the southern central part of the city, almost, right? This is huge park there, Nose Hill Park. But the one thing about Calgary is that because it's so situated and so closely accessible to the mountains, Banff and Canmore, Bragg Creek, and that was something I didn't get to experience. The one thing about Calgary, and anybody who's living there that comes from maybe somewhere else, is the mountains. The view of it, the call of it, the pull of it, constant traffic towards it.
Mm.
uh, it's amazing. So that's what we did a lot of. We did hiking and things like that.
Yeah, no, I was interested to hear what you first did when you came to Calgary and what things made you start to feel like you've settled in. Because, someone listening to this podcast could be someone relatively new to Canada. We've had a lot of people moving to the province and to the city from other places across the country, but also we have refugees from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, and they're trying to fit in. How did you feel in terms of fitting in? And does any of your Colombian heritage come into that in terms of how you felt in terms of fitting in?
Actually, in Calgary, if you showed like the motivation or the drive to be a part of something, you're pretty much easily accepted into the group. Provided you're not like giving off serial killer vibes or anything like that.
Mm.
I
Did you
was
struggle with that?
all, all the time. Relax.
All the time.
I just don't want you to leave. Yeah. No, no, no.
No, but you're
Uh,
saying if you're a fairly easygoing person, like you're sending out positive energy, then you're saying you felt
oh
others
yeah.
were accepting. Yeah.
Yeah, Calgary has like because there's more people and there's more communities and more groups. There's just more opportunities to try different things. So I was trying squash. I was part of a ball hockey league. I would be taking like cooking classes, or I once took a cheese making class. Things like
Mm.
that. Even though Calgary has a lot of opportunities to explore different things, a lot of people who want to share their knowledge in a lot of ways because there's just more people logically,
Mm.
and it kind of fits the schedule. It can't just be like one day. One day is almost something going on all the time, essentially, right? So, although the Calgary downtown, it does get pretty quiet at night, and I thought that was kind of weird, is compared to like cities like Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver, the downtown just gets pretty quiet. Whereas the Beltline or 17th or Kensington is still pretty busy.
Mm.
So that was different. Whereas and in Regina, it's always quiet except for a few areas.
So, in your work setting and in your social group, did people have a lot of various backgrounds, ethnic or otherwise?
Yeah, there was some people from. There was a lot of European based cultures. For example, I once talked to a person from England and from Scotland.
From England, really exotic.
Ireland. There was even a person who was mixed Irish and Scottish, and I thought, wow, you know,
Well, I hope you spoke a little slower so they could follow what you were saying.
it is true. There are a lot of Scottish people in Calgary.
But if we're going to look at some of the negative stereotypes of Alberta, some people say that it's not as tolerant of people who maybe look different or have an accent or are new to the country. Like some people have that impression, and whether it's true or not, I just want to know your personal experience. Did you find people asking you like, "Oh, where are you from?" as if they assume you might not be Canadian? Did that ever happen?
No, actually, not
Oh,
so much
good.
in Calgary. Maybe it's because I made sure to bathe and present
Come
myself.
on, come on.
Be presentable. But actually, growing up in Regina and experiencing more of, not me personally, but my brother is darker,
Hmm.
and I've been asked here more in Regina where I'm from, if I'm not so much native, but Greek, Italian, that type of thing.
Oh,
Never South American. The thing about Saskatchewan and maybe Calgary is when a lot of times when you tell them that your parents are from South America, they just assume Mexico. To them that that's Latin culture, Mexico down, right? Nothing else. So
oh.
I've been referred to as more Mexican than anything. If I tell them I
Mm.
was South American or Latino in that aspect.
Mhm.
But it's nothing compared to like sort of what we see, like the racism towards the First Nations people and all that,
Mm.
and even my brother being darker, being followed around and all that. So we've always had that hint of more so here, where it's more of a small town feel in Regina. In Calgary, I felt quite comfortable. If people didn't know where I'm from, it would just and had a little more an exotic air that I would try to play up more than anything. So not a negative way. Uh,
Mm.
Honestly, in my lifetime, I've only been experienced racism once, and it was from a familiar, angry, crazy man here in Regina who wanders around, and he called me a half breed, and that was pretty much the only thing that I ever came across. Right, so actually, I've been pretty lucky. I know some people have experienced it, and usually maybe it's from an older generation or maybe a group of people with conservative ideals and things like that. But I've been pretty lucky. I've met nothing but great people in Calgary for the most part.
Has your view of Calgary changed now that you've been away for a few years? Like, do you appreciate
Oh
certain
yeah.
things more? And what do you
Oh
miss
yeah.
about Calgary?
I would say the one thing I miss about Calgary that I regret not doing more of was going out into not just the Rockies, but the surrounding areas, nature. I love Drumheller. I loved the Badlands. I loved going to Banff whenever I could, even doing a simple trail through Sulphur Mountain. Those are the things that I regret. Is just like the proximity to the trails. big part of, I think, Calgary culture is that the rivers and the valleys and the mountains, it's all, in a sort of nice close area, and it's easily accessible. And there's always somebody that's willing to do that. There are always groups for that. So I regret not taking more advantage of that while I
Yep.
was living there. I also got into that other habit in Calgary was, sometimes you work so much for the company and not for yourself, that your time is all gone and you don't have the energy to do anything
Mm,
else, because Calgary is on average, what, 15% higher cost of living than it is in Regina as far as things go. So there's a trade-off. We have more time, it's less expensive, but there, you don't have as much time, but you have different opportunities and more, I don't want to say distractions, more things to do, right? Especially if you're a single guy. And
yeah. No, I hear you about how lucky we are here in Calgary, the proximity, especially to the mountains and the parks and Kananaskis Park and so on. When I've been out in Kananaskis once with my wife at the lower Kananaskis Lake there, and I was saying to her, if you were a billionaire, you couldn't build this. Like I was referring to the scene we were looking at with the lakes and the mountains. It's incredible the richness, the natural treasure of these mountains and forests, and yeah, and the fact that for relatively very low cost we can go out and experience them. It is amazing, and it's amazing that more people don't get a chance to, or don't take advantage of the opportunity to enjoy it. I knew somebody they were about almost 50 years old, and they had been in Alberta since they were 8 years old, and they told me they'd never been to Canmore. They'd never stopped in Canmore.
really,
They had driven past it. They'd been to BC and
oh
they'd
yeah,
been to Banff, but they had never stopped in Canmore. And I was like, how do you live an hour away from what everyone knows is this beautiful town that was the host of the Nordic events in the 1988 Winter Olympics, and it's right there, right next to the highway. You can see it. The Three
exactly.
Sisters Mountains, and I'm biased, of course, because I grew up in Canmore, but it still was amazing to me that he had never stopped in Canmore. And then another time, I was working in I was doing some temp work in some kind of a warehouse or something, and there was a guy he was a new Canadian. He had been in Canada for 2 years, and he had never been to the mountains. Like he had never been out to Banff yet for 2 years. Now I sympathize with that because it just reflected how he was new here and his focus was his work. His focus was just adjusting to this new country. But it was still quite remarkable to me that not once did he have a day off where he felt he could take his family to the mountains an hour or an hour and 15 minutes away, right? So, and he'd been here 2 years already. So, yeah, but you can imagine the financial pressures he's probably under, and he's probably working 6 or 7 days a week. So,
Exactly. And then the nature isn't a luxury that a lot of people from other countries, think about. It's not something that is a thing they strive for. It's maybe other things, but that's the one thing I regret, is not getting out as much. And I had friends who loved the mountains, who snowboarded, who would go each weekend to go up there as well. And
right.
me, I'm not a big winter sports guy and that type of thing, but it was a privilege, just going out there. And that's one thing that always caught me. The first time, leaving Saskatchewan, going through Calgary, going through the mountains on the way to BC, it still resonates with me. And I always try to capture that feeling whenever I go out to Calgary, and maybe not getting out as much as I should have or wanted to towards the end. But I was, also one thing with Calgary is when you're part of like a social group, like a ball hockey league, and you're driving from one end of the city to another for a game that, you're paying for, right? Part of the group and everything. It took some getting used to it as well, because you're driving from maybe 45 minutes or something like that. To me, it's going from Regina to Moose Jaw, which is kind of a bigger thing. It's like a day event rather than just going to play 1 hour game, right?
Right.
So it was the driving, the locations, how far everything is spaced out in between. That's one thing that I don't really miss, but
Mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I understand. Yeah. Calgary's
relying,
very spread out. Yeah.
you kind of need a vehicle to, just to enjoy it, to have that freedom to enjoy all of it all.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, it sounds like when you were in Calgary, you found it quite easy to connect with other people. Is that fair to say, like both through your work and through other social means? I know you and I used to go to comedy shows, for example, and there you find like-minded people who are enjoying the shows, and there's other ways. What were the ways that you've connected with other people, and how easy did you find it to make new friendships and connections?
Well, alcohol certainly was helpful,
Yes, it is a social lubricant. Yes, it works well to get the
It
walls
is
down.
social lubricant, especially during stampedes and things like that. And
Yeah.
but sports I found was easy because I follow sports.
Mm.
And workplace, people like talk sports, and so I was through a lot of venues or free tickets. I would go and enjoy and explore sporting events, concerts, live shows. That was great, like theater or film, because you have that film festival there.
So you found it quite easy to connect with people?
That's a good question. I've always been a shy person or quiet, so
I'd use the word
never
awkward, but keep going.
or awkward or just oh.
Or maybe I'm just talking about myself now.
Uh, yeah, I think I once I got to know somebody and everything. If I like them and if I'm more comfortable around them, for me, it was a bit of trust. Opening up. I have to build that trust before I can open up and joke around and things like that. So it was finding similar interests and all that, and those I didn't share interests. I would just I once went on a blind date and I just said all the opposite things because I didn't want it to continue on, things like that. So you find ways.
Can you elaborate on that? Because some people might be surprised to hear about that strategy. So, if I understand you correctly, you were on a blind date and you realized you didn't have much in common with this person. You didn't want to have a second date,
Yeah.
and so you purposely said the opposite of what you thought she'd want to hear.
So it'd make it easier when I can ghost her, and she wouldn't have to worry about me, because this guy doesn't like anything I like, even though there were some similarities. We just so I did that a few times, just lied, so I didn't have to create too much guilt or ugliness when there was no callback. Yeah,
Well, it sounds like you kind of front loaded the ugliness, got it all out of the way all at once,
I don't want to waste her
rather
time.
than
Come on. We both have our values. I remember once when at work, because work ends up being like a place where you could build a social life, through connections, going out,
Yeah.
and you're always running to the same people, going for drinks with the same people. One
Yeah.
thing about Calgary is you have to learn how to go for drinks and
Yeah.
build up your soft skills for that, because it is almost an extension of work in a lot of ways. Going for drinks, exploring different restaurants, communities, because that's a big part of the culture there as well too, is supporting local businesses, having drinks.
But in terms of connecting with people, see, my personal experience is I find Calgary a little bit standoffish, like just in general. What I'm comparing it to is, well, first of all, I grew up in a small town. So in Canmore, which back when I grew up there, it was just a normal small town. It wasn't the kind of tourist place that it is now. So it was just a normal small town. This was prior to the Olympics, prior to, this huge infusion of investment and all this new development and so on. So it's changed the nature of the town. But also, I'm comparing it to, I've lived in Ottawa, I've lived in Victoria. And in those places, I just found that people they were more likely to invite you to their house. They're more likely to just make you feel like you belonged and that they wanted to connect with you. And I find, again, it may be just my own personal experience, maybe other people's experience is different. In Calgary, people are more like they treat their home like their castle, and they're kind of closed off in that castle and they're not likely to know their neighbors. And it might be partly based on geography that many of us drive long distances to the suburbs and we're disconnected, therefore, from the rest of the people because our cars are kind of cocoons, right? They keep us isolated from other people. Maybe I'm rambling now, but how does it compare to Regina? Do you find in Regina, do you feel it's the same as Calgary in terms of how open people are to welcoming you into their social circles?
Yes and no. I think you're going to find that for me, it doesn't matter where I would, if I'm not going to make the opportunity to go out and connect, I can very easily live in my own cocoon, whether it would be in Ulsan, South Korea, or Calgary, or even Regina. The one thing that was always consistent is there are people out there who are willing to give their time and who want to connect with somebody, as long as, there's you show that you're sincere and make the effort. I always thought that when I was living in Calgary and I would visit Edmonton, for example, Edmonton to me reminded me a lot of as a bigger Regina. It was a government city. Maybe it took a little longer to fix things, cheaper in a lot of ways as far as infrastructure goes, but there was a strong community spirit, or
Hmm.
more for cultural, their festivals I think were better set up or accessible than, say, in Calgary. You would have to almost like spend a little bit more to experience that. So that was maybe the difference, the cost and how accessible that is. But Calgary does have that soul, and it has that loyalty. You just have to kind of maybe search for it a little bit more. People are more
Mm.
maybe stressed out as far as keeping up with the Joneses, or is that push, to kind of follow that plan of keeping up, I suppose,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
because you need to support that sprawl and that energy and that spending and all that, and the whole infrastructure, how it was a little bit more centered around financially and not trying to make it through, as opposed to maybe, well, I'll say other cities that don't have that, because it is such a big part of controlling the oil and gas and what it does mean for Canada and all that, that they had to keep it going. But I can be in a cocoon anywhere. It's just to have be more self aware of it. After I
Right.
left Calgary, I was a little bit more self aware of what I was doing that maybe wasn't for the best, for myself personally or emotionally. But that comes with time, I guess, time and space in a lot of ways.
Hmm. As I mentioned, I've lived in Ottawa and Victoria, so I'm comparing how it felt in those cities. But also, I visit Slovakia often. As you know, my wife is from Slovakia. My father was from Slovakia, so almost every year we go there and spend quite a bit of time there. And there, it just seems like people really make you feel like family, and they are likely to invite you to their home. They invite you for dinner. They go out to the pub and socialize, not just with work colleagues but with other people too. And I'm always struck that when I come back to Calgary, you really have to make that effort. If you're not joining that sports group, if you're not going to that Toastmasters meeting, if you're not going to that karate club or whatever it is that you do to connect with people, then you can be very isolated. And I think it's partly a function of geography with the suburban sprawl and all of that. But I think there's something else to it, and it might be partly economic, where when people are doing really well economically, and a lot of people in Calgary, have quite good incomes, they don't feel that same need to connect. But certainly in Slovakia, people don't have a lot. And when you don't have a lot, it just seems relationships take a higher priority, and people are more likely to connect with other people because they feel they need others. And in Calgary, a lot of people kind of don't feel like they need others. In fact, they kind of like the idea that they can go off to their suburban home and be with just their family and or the select few that they invite over, and be disconnected from most other people.
It's true, but there's obviously it has their that other aspect too, where maybe it's just too much stress and too much
Hmm.
vicious cycle. I've known of a few friends where their neighbors had violent issues. My ex-girlfriend's grandfather, their neighbor, young couple who had a student living in the basement. He was an architect. He was fairly, well off and all that, but he ended up killing his family and himself, right? And I think there's more of that violence too with this close-in. Pandemic has
Exacerbated.
exacerbated that. Yes, yeah, unfortunately, but yeah, I do see that where people are so more focused on their livelihoods sometimes at the expense of their emotional health.
Yeah, I know, I see that too. A lot of people work some long hours here in Calgary, and they're well paid for it, but you wonder if the price is worth it sometimes.
Well, yeah, even Vancouver, like my friend who lives in Vancouver, one or two jobs just to, make ends meet there, and don't really have that community, but you have more of that anonymity, in
Yes.
bigger cities that, some people might like, that freedom. If I was single, I can decide I could just go to this place tonight and, whatever happens, happens. I don't have anybody to answer to, that type of thing. It becomes a vicious cycle because you can just always reason that, that's what you can do. And when you don't really want to do that. So
Sounds like there's a lot of guilt you're working through.
there was some. Yeah, there was definitely some. Yeah. I loved it, but it was also to me, a city where my ex and her family lived. It was the first time I was part of an extended family, and then it sort of ways cut off. So I was quite stuck. I was saying my own, and then trying to find, building up my own little family, and maybe was drinking a little bit too much, obviously, and having some different values, really trying to live my 20s and my 30s. So that changed, and I had to make a change, and
Yeah.
that's why I came back to Regina as well, because I wasn't enjoying myself in Calgary because I always had these other things that were pressing, that were affecting my quality of life there. I couldn't be myself or couldn't be who I wanted. Now I a little more comfortable, and I think I can explore that.
So compared to Calgary, you feel in Regina you're more relaxed and you can be more yourself?
Yeah, I have like maybe a couple of friends here that every now and again will go out and connect with here, but it's nothing like it was in Calgary. And so it was more just kind of focusing on my own and learning to be on my own and be alone in a lot of ways, work through my abandonment issues on my own. So that helped, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and being close to family and seeing them improve, their quality of life increase, and having hope, that to me has been great too as well, especially my younger brother.
Right. And yeah, I want people to understand that. So you didn't have like negative issues with Calgary and that's why you left. It was largely to be closer to family. There were family reasons that you wanted to be back in Regina, right?
Well, that last year it was a good way to leave the city. I wanted to stay in Calgary. It just didn't work out that way at that time.
And you haven't ruled out that it could be possible you end up back in Calgary someday, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have like a lot of freedom. I just had to make a choice about where I want to go with it. I don't know if I would ever stay one place for too long anymore. Maybe that's not the call of my life unless lightning strikes and I find somebody and get married and all that. Then it might be nice to settle down someplace and have a home. But at this point, I think it's just enjoying the freedom I have and then the options and go from there. Yeah.
Hmm. What are some stereotypes about Calgary or Alberta that you think are rooted in reality, and some that you think are not rooted in reality based on your experience?
Well, everybody likes to drink and knows how to ride a horse. Cowboys, that type of thing, and go out fighting at the nightclubs. Go pick a fight, and get in your truck and drive around and burn fuel just for the sake of it. And yeah, that was kind of like the misconception I had about Calgary.
Really? You had those images in your mind? Really? Come on.
No, Calgary. It was more hockey. Such a big thing, the Calgary Flames. A lot of my knowledge of Calgary is based on hockey. The battles with Alberta, with Edmonton. Edmonton was my favorite team growing up. So you always see Calgary, the night images, the beautiful downtowns, like how big the tower. So it was more about the infrastructure. In fact, it was an oil and gas town, and there was a lot of huge rodeo each year. People love their cows there, I guess.
Yeah, we love our cows. Yeah, it's cow town, isn't it?
Cows. It is. It's a cow town. The Olympics, obviously, 1988 was a big part of my childhood too. That was one thing that stuck out in Calgary was how close it was to the Rockies. Misconceptions that everybody was a cowboy and everybody liked to drive drunk, that type of thing.
Really? That's an impression of Alberta in general, or what? I don't know.
No, in Calgary. And Edmonton, they're like angels. Calgary, not so much.
What?
No. Calgary is just more based on like I guess sports and oil and gas, the main things. But the people I met couldn't be further from being a cowboy or an alcoholic. So
Right. Were you ever tempted to go to Edmonton? Like, after all, they do have a semi-professional hockey team.
I was here when we go to like that Mosaic Multicultural Festival there in the park, Harlock Park, just seeing how great that is. So like, oh yeah, it would be nice to live in Edmonton. It had that closer feel to Regina that I missed and all that, but it was super cold, right? And the wind and everything because it's further north. That's one thing I didn't like about it. That reminded me too much of Saskatchewan. And Calgary has the Chinooks, so the winters every now and again would come and it would be like beautiful day. That's something I didn't experience growing up as well, so that was nice. The Chinooks, seeing that in the sky for the first time, the arch, yeah, that was huge for me.
Personally, it's always been really hard to imagine moving to Edmonton because I grew up in the mountains and Calgary's so close to the mountains. And so to willingly move farther away from the mountains is I just can't imagine it. And I'm sure there's many people who love Edmonton. As you said, there's a strong sense of community. There's wonderful festivals, and there's a community feel that maybe Calgary could learn from. But for someone from this area, I just can't. To me, it's all negative, mostly negatives. The idea of going away from the mountains, and away from the skiing and away from Kananaskis lakes and all this stuff.
But Edmonton's close to Jasper, right? And going through to Edson and everything, you are going through some different terrain, and which I thought was, quite fascinating. Every city has their pros and cons, I guess. But Edmonton to me had more of that artistic, it was more vibrant. And then I would say Calgary was more focused on maybe profit, how to make profit from that. So there was more free things, I suppose. But it also depends on what you're looking for, too. You get some pretty cool free things in Calgary. One guy actually gave me some... it was during the Stampede, and my buddy and I were walking down Center, and he was offering us free cocaine. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. We never took it, but that was nice. That's something you don't usually get.
Yeah, no, that's a sign of a vibrant community.
Or profitable, I don't know. Entrepreneurial, maybe?
Well, thanks, Joe. I think it's been really interesting to hear from someone who spent a number of years in Calgary and now has that perspective that comes from being away. And I hope the listeners also, I'm sure they also enjoyed your perspective. Thank you for spending a little time with me.
Oh, the pleasure was all mine, Dan. Thank you very much.